the next few minutes. Thank you for your patience. My name is Indra Naidu. I'm the Director of the Independent Office of Evaluation at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, based in Rome. It is a distinct pleasure to have a very high-level, eminent set of panelists today to share experiences on a very critical topic on evaluation, and that is the balancing act between accountability, engagement, and learning. And each will provide operational experience and perspectives from their respective organizations. So this panel will explore how, while evaluation is independent, IFAD, ADB, NDB, CABEI, and EBRD, we have increased the points of intersection between the evaluand and the evaluator through a longer journey that deepens the dialogue and conversation. This enables the evaluand to view the process as empowering and to develop new insights and skills. For this to happen, evaluators need to be trained to engage with empathy, recognizing that tensions are necessary to surface issues. Organizational governance structures also need to be in place to guarantee operational and intellectual independence of evaluation officers. It is through this process of inclusion that independent evaluation officers are able to improve the mandate of their respective organizations. Before calling upon the eminent panel, allow me to spend a few minutes introducing each of them. I will start with Dr. Emmanuel Jimenez, also the host today. He is the Director General of Independent Evaluation in a career spanning over 3 decades. He has focused on evaluation, policy advice, research, and teaching in the fields of economics and development. He has published extensively in peer-reviewed professional journals, books, and reports on economic development, focusing on public policy to improve social and economic outcomes of poor households and individuals. The second member of the panel, Dr. Veronique Salzer-Lozac, is Chief Evaluator at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. She is responsible for delivering high-quality independent evaluations that enhance the EBRD's accountability and provide evidence-based lessons for better results. She aims to foster a culture of evaluation in the bank and ensure that evaluation is useful to board members and operations in their efforts to build a resilient and sustainable future. The third speaker, Ashwani Muthu, is the first Director General of the Independent Evaluation Office at the New Development Bank. He brings over 35 years of professional and managerial experience in the United Nations system and multinational development banks, focusing on independent evaluations, global policies and country strategies, development projects and programs, and quality assurance in the agriculture and rural sectors, infrastructure, renewable energy, climate change, social inclusion, inequality, and others. The last speaker, Dr. Jose Efrain Darras, is Chief of the Independent Evaluation Office at the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. Dr. Darras' professional career spans more than 20 years. During the time, he has been Chair of the Society for Latin American Studies in London in 2005. He also served as CABEI's sector specialist and acted as its chief economist in 2012. As the manager, he was responsible for the creation and the implementation of the Development Impact Evaluation System at the bank. What I will do is pose a set of questions to each of the panelists, and they will reflect on it before we move to the second round, and then I'll open to audience. So my first question goes to my colleague, Emmanuel. In your experience, is there a contradiction between safeguarding independence, on the one hand, and increasing engagement through collaborative processes, on the other, or can the two be both achieved? If so, what might be the understanding of tensions to achieve a right balance? Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Indra, and thanks for inviting me to be here at the risk of being a little bit overexposed, given the number of panels I happen to be in. But thanks. Look, when we were talking, you asked whether there was potentially a trade-off between a couple of things, which is accountability and learning. And as an economist, of course, I thrive on trade-offs. We're trained to be that, as Veronique knows, because trade-offs are what generate prices and scarcity, and that's what economists study. So we love trade-offs. At the same time, I think that we also want to see whether there are possibilities for win-win. So I think my answer, Indran, is that yes, there is potentially a trade-off between these two, but not necessarily. So there are some areas in which the two go hand in hand, in which you can, because you learn a lot through accountability. By doing your accountability function, and we heard the Chinese, for example, examples yesterday of program evaluation, in which it's very clear that they do evaluation in order to hold people to account because they know what works and what doesn't. I think at the same time, if you push that to the extreme, there is a possibility that the incentives to report the right thing might be compromised. So I think that to a large extent, it really depends very much on what happens to your evaluation, to the evaluand, as you put it, after you hold them to account. If, as a result of an evaluation, if things aren't going well, they're supported, there'll be a great incentive for them to be truthful about that reporting. If, on the other, their heads are cut off, then there'll be a tendency, perhaps, to shy away from truthful reporting, and that certainly would be an issue. So my answer is that it depends very much on what happens, on how you manage this. Just last example from my end, and in the ADB, like in other MDBs, we have a system of self-assessment, and our function is to validate that. So every activity, projects, TA, programs are self-assessed by operational staff on whether or not they believe it's successful. Our job in the Independent Evaluation Department is to ask the question, on the basis of the evidence you present, do we believe that your assessment is valid? Any guesses as to what percent do you think that we have to come to the same conclusion? Who says it's 100%? Who says it's 50%? Anyone? Of the time that we disagree? 75%? Okay, it's about between 70 and 80% of the time we agree. We believe that this is a system that can work if we make sure that staff are given the incentive to be truthful, because then they will actually own the result and then learn from it better. In fact, at the end of every year, we give an award to the best self-assessments, and at least one or two of them are to projects that were unsuccessful. So I'll leave it at that and just say that it's possible there'll be trade-offs, but this can be managed.
Thank you very much, Manny. Most insightful. And colleagues, we're talking about a continuum. As you mentioned, heads cut off and reflection. And that is attention. So there's a lot of issues that are unspoken in this process, and we need to acknowledge it. I think the percentage part is good. 75 to 80%, the agreement. There will always be a 20% more or less margin where there's going to be some tensions, but that's not a problem, long as in most cases we have this. And I like your point about becoming truthful and becoming more self-reflective, but that takes time to actually build. With that, I now move over to another part of the globe and ask Veronique, in your experience, what are some of the key elements of evaluative function and components of the evaluation journey that enable the evaluand to view the process as empowering and to develop new insights and skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm so very happy to be here with all my colleagues from the Evaluation Cooperation Group. The two words that I pick from your question is the journey and the empowerment. I would say that the first point, I do agree with that it is a journey, and that it's a process, and it's an ongoing process. Empowerment, we say, who do we want to empower? And I will get started with that, try to identify the different stakeholders we wish to empower in our journey. Well, first, the obvious one, it's our colleagues from our institutions, and even more obvious is the board. As independent evaluation departments, we report directly to the board, and they are what we consider our prime clients. But of course, we also want to empower a broader community and empower the clients, the beneficiaries of our project. So in the case of EBRD, it's mainly private sector. So we say we would like to empower the private sector also for them to have some ownership of the evaluation findings so that they can work together with EBRD to try to improve and take on board some of the findings. But behind the private sector itself, and that's where we haven't really gotten there yet, I think that there is room for us to go a little bit further and to try to empower, or at least at the minimum to listen to the clients of our clients, the clients of the private sector, the beneficiaries. And I will give a few examples how sometimes we try to do it in some of our evaluations. But at the end of the day, when we talk about empowerment, I think we should also recognize that the one that we're also empowering is ourselves. By empowering our evaluants, the whole community, we are empowering the function of independent evaluation so that it's recognized and it's more listened to. And that's really one of the objectives we should have. I think that there are three key, I don't know if we would call it pillars, but three enablers of this empowerment in the journey. The first one would be the relevance and timeliness of our topics or the object of our evaluation. We often talk about the relevance of our evaluation. It's very important that we pick the topic that are of interest to all of those stakeholders that I mentioned, because we might be interested in evaluating one aspect of our institution's activities, and nobody really is really concerned about it. So it's important that we do our job during the whole year, listening to board discussions, listening to our colleagues, try to see what are the topics that have been put on the table, what are the type of questions that board members are asking, so that we preempt on what they want to know, and we have an idea of which areas they would be interested in. Just one example, last year, a few board members again and again mentioned water and water infrastructure. So of course, we took a note that water should be on our next work program. The other enabler will be the trust, building trust and credibility, and that's an enabler of the process itself, but also the credibility of the analysis, our findings, our analysis. So in that case, what we try to do is to empower our different stakeholders in making sure that the stakeholders we evaluate think that they will be evaluated in a fair way, that will be objective. And that's also something that we need to do, to keep in mind on a day-to-day basis, the way we interact with them, the way we listen, the way we write our reports, tells a lot about our objectivity and our independence. What we want to build is the confidence and credibility enough that even if they disagree with the findings, they will still accept the findings because they will at least agree on the fact that they are objective, that they are based on evidence, and that they're well documented. And I would say that's a major risk for independence, is that for our function of evaluation, is that we're being perceived as biased. Of course, we all have biases, but we should try to minimize them. And the last point will be engagement, and we talked about it a few times in other sessions, and it's how we engage with stakeholders, those we evaluate, but also how we engage with the clients, how we engage also with the beneficiaries of our project, so that we base our findings on raw data. So for example, doing survey of the beneficiaries of financial intermediaries, or if we try to have sentiment analysis when we do country-level evaluations, or making sure that we also include the CSOs in our evaluations. So all of that, I think, is important in terms of empowering. But again, it's us that we are trying to empower at the end of the day.
Thank you very much, Veronique. Relevance, trust building, and engagement, and how these work together are actually key points. And I think the word that you mentioned that's important, our greatest risk is being perceived as bias, more so now with the geopolitical situation that is here. Thank you for those insights also about the organization. I now have pleasure to move to my colleague Ashwani Muthu. In your opinion, how important is it, or would it be, for the evaluations to be trained to engage with empathy, recognizing that tensions with the evaluand are necessary in order to surface issues? Ashwani.
Thank you very much, Indran, for having me, and it's a pleasure to be with my distinguished colleagues. So let me preamble my thoughts by saying that, as we all know, evaluation is not about pointing fingers. It's not about finding faults. But tensions do arise when you do an evaluation, especially when the results are negative. We have all faced that, and that keeps happening all the time. When results are good, there's absolutely no tension. That's always the case. But having said that, still part of my preamble, in my career, I've had many evaluations around which there was a lot of tension. And my personal assessment is that those are the evaluations that over time are the most transformative and the most influential ones, because they really do surface critical issues that need to be addressed. And as Veronique was saying, sooner or later, I think there's a time dimension to it. The evaluand might not accept recommendations for change immediately at the point of evaluation. But you will notice, just go back in your career and you will see that sooner or later they will do majority of the things that are being recommended. And I see that happening also now, only after 3.5 years in the NDB, in the New Development Bank. We recommended, for example, the establishment of country strategies for borrowing countries. And no way they accepted it. But now, after 3 years, I'm hearing through the corridors they're starting to think about that. So, but having said that, tensions do arise, and they have to be dealt with utmost tact. Respect is something we should never compromise when we do evaluations, and empathy. So coming to the core of my response, I'm not sure there is any specific training in empathy as a whole. There might be trainings in some components of empathy, but there are good practices that we should definitely keep in mind, and based on my evaluation experience, I'd like to share some of those with you. How to be empathetic in a context of a tense evaluation, and some of the good practices that you should embed into your evaluation processes. In no order of priority, of course, I think one of the most important things is to minimize surprises. When you can see that evaluation results, meaning the results of the operation or the policy, might not be so positive or rosy, don't just wait until the final report is ready to share it with the evaluand, and find ways and means along the process to start anticipating them. Maybe not the whole thing, but so people start getting prepared that, look, this is looking a bit shaky. So minimize surprises. The second point is, when we write our reports, but also in our oral communication, in our presentations, in an evaluation which is tense, I think mastering the art of communication is fundamental. And I think we should be empathetic and do our best as evaluators to highlight positive achievements first, if they do exist. And I'm sure there's always something positive, because people in a project have worked hard over a period of time. They like to be recognized. We all like to be recognized. So I think mastering the art of communication is very important also in our evaluation processes. The other thing is, I think, in these situations, we have to make extra effort to listen. Often, we as evaluators, when we are doing an evaluation, we believe we have the upper hand in that particular moment, and we don't really keep our minds always open to listening to feedback, to listening to new information and evidence that is provided to us that might make us change our assessment. So I think listening very, very carefully, and especially if there is new evidence, new data, be open to reconsidering your initial thinking. Let me wrap up by highlighting two other points, and then that's it. I think another thing that we all have, I'm sure, experienced is when there is a tense situation and the results might not be so good, we should also be aware of the constraints that policymakers, implementers face in the course of an operation that is being evaluated, and see how those constraints might have affected the results that are being generated. I think they appreciate that, and that minimizes tension as well, because you do recognize some of the challenges they might have been exposed to in the context of a particular operation. But let me stop here, and happy to engage further in the question and answer session on this particular issue. Thank you very much, Indran. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashwani. Also experienced talking once again. 3 takeaways. One, there is a lag in the timing, but there's also an issue of not acknowledging the problem at the time. And all of us have seen 3 years later critical evaluations. They say, yeah, well, you got it right. So part of it is also a psychological element. The second part you mentioned is minimize surprises, and therefore process is important, as has been mentioned. Start sharing tidbits as we go along so they don't get a heart attack when it comes to the final part. And we need to understand we're dealing with human beings. And the third part, highlight the positive as best you can. There tends to be a tendency with the evaluators to be like dentists. They only look at the cavities and not anything else. So we need to sort of do some shift and also become more empathetic, and that only can come through training and over time, and also reduce the personalities that have this tendency. We have evaluators, let's go out and get them, because the reality, there are a whole lot of constraints. So that's very, very deep discussions. Thank you very much. I now have pleasure in moving over to my colleague, Jose. If you could share in your experience and how and to what extent are inclusiveness and engagement critical elements of an evaluation process, ensuring that the outcomes of the journey also foster operational and broader organizational transformation. An experience from CABEI. Over.
Thank you, Indran, for facilitating this very strategic discussion, and also thank you to the Independent Evaluation Department and Manny for organizing this brilliant week. From Central America, it's a great pleasure for us to be here on behalf of the Central American Bank for Economic Integration. The question we are addressing today on the importance of inclusion and participation in evaluation is a very key question, especially in the institutions in which you are creating an evaluation culture and also becoming a learning organization. Is that better? Yeah? You might need to a bit closer. Okay, perfect. Sorry. Thank you. The question we are addressing today is important. Okay, thank you. That's great. It's important. It depends on the institutions as well. I mean, if it's an institution that has already built an evaluation culture, is already a learning organization, you will have an approach with the trade-offs. And if it's an institution that is growing up in the creation of those capacities, you will have to maybe find a way to strengthen the engagement. Let me share my points of view in the case of CABEI, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, a bank that has recently embarked in the process of having all the governance, corporate governance with self-evaluation, independent evaluation office, an independent evaluation office reporting to the board, and also the creation of the evaluation system you mentioned at the beginning in the project cycle. In our point of view, this engagement is very important to have a very good balance with the independence in a way that if you don't create engagement, you are maybe losing the opportunity to have an evaluation able to introduce transformations to the institution. In our practice, we have learned that the inclusion is not a bonus, but rather is an essential condition for evaluation to have actual impact, the influence we want to have transformative lessons, transformative recommendations. Because you have different voices during the process. Why is this so important for us? Because an evaluation co-constructed with multiple stakeholders better reflects the complexity of the context in which we operate. I mean, we are evaluators, but also you need the project manager, you need the beneficiaries, you need the decision takers, you need different areas, risk management, finance, and the sectoral. I mean, you need to listen to all of them because the reality is complex and evaluators are not specialists. This morning, somebody was mentioning if we have experience in urban development. Have we developed projects in housing? Maybe some or many of the evaluators haven't developed those kind of projects. So you need to have different voices. And on the other hand, when the results are felt as shared and not externally imposed, you are going to create the empowerment you need later on for the recommendations you are going to introduce. And if we want to foster operational model, if we want to foster the transformation of the agenda, we need to empower those that are going to be the implementers of those recommendations. At CABEI, we have shifts to, the shifting you were mentioning is something very, very key, very strategic for us. For example, when we can talk technically by the process. For example, when we design an evaluation, when we propose an evaluation, we start a dialogue with the different technical areas. Since the establishment of the objectives of the evaluation, the methodology, what we used to refer to the concept note or the approach paper, in order to listen, how do they see the evaluation coming? I mean, how are they assessing what we are proposing? Later on, for example, we open spaces during the implementation of the evaluation, during the data collection, during the analysis, the application of the methodology. Early findings, for example, is a very key important moment, very key issue for us, because in that way, the learning starts at just when the knowledge is being created. And I want to introduce a concept here. I mean, given that our business models in all the MDBs is added value chain, we are co-creators of value. We have to identify the evaluation as a key part of the co-creation of value. So if we need to create value, I mean, to go deeper, for example, we were talking today about the importance of additionality, financial additionality versus non-financial additionality. But if we want to give power to that knowledge, we need to create empowerment and engagement and bring that to the project cycle. In the final phase, when we close a report, for example, all those preliminary findings, recommendations, and when we are arriving to the final version, we have a consensus, even if we don't agree in everything. I mean, we agree and we disagree in the final version, but you created the space for the co-creation of value. We identified that with that engagement, we don't compromise the independence, but we have to be careful in which stage the institution is. If you have a very strength self-evaluation department, technical areas, and independent evaluation area, you can have very open discussions in which you can have the engagement and also the independence, having the trade-off to find what is good for the institution, what is good for the project, what is going to be the added value you are going to bring to the institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. Concepts that come through, and it's critical for all of us. The co-creation, which is necessary when you have complexity so that we get the perspectives. You also mentioned if you have a shared understanding of the results, we have the basis and platform for recommendations that will be taken on board. And the third point, theme that came through is the co-creation of values. You also mentioned there's an agreement on the final results. There may be disagreement in terms of some of the elements, but that, of course, is much more empowering. And that comes through very well in terms of moving from the level of the individual also to the organizational. Thank you very much for those perspectives. Colleagues, we now move to a second round of this very exciting live insights from people that have actually spent decades running evaluation offices internationally. So it really helps a lot. And I will go back to my colleague, Emmanuel, can you provide us with a few examples of some of the main organizational governance structures that are in place at the ADB, which guarantee the operational and intellectual independence of your evaluation office, and which in turn facilitate its openness to engagement with the evaluand? Emmanuel.
Thanks a lot, Indran. Let me just say 5 things that are institutional structures that try to guarantee this independence, and also one thing that might inhibit it. The 5 things is, first, we have a policy, and unlike CABEI, which is new, this independent function has been around since 2008, I believe, is when the policy was established and accepted by the board. The evaluation policy makes it very clear that the evaluation function reports not to the president of the ADB, but to the board of directors directly, the shareholders. When I came on board, I was interviewed by no one from management, not the president, but only by board members. And they gave me a single, non-renewable 5-year term. I have no career aspirations at the ADB, and that's certainly one way that they guarantee my independence. That's the second thing that we have. The third thing that I'd like to mention is that we have a process in which we are independent, but we engage by sharing our concept note and our approach paper before we even get to the evaluation itself, but with both the board and management, and that's very important. The fourth thing I'd like to mention is communications. All of our reports are publicly available, including those concept notes and approach papers. And we, in fact, publish our news release a day, on the same day, or maybe even the day after the board meeting, so that there's no chance that the board discussion itself will affect our independence. In fact, when I was hired, some of the board members said, you know, you're independent not only of management, you're independent of the board. And why is that? Because the board is not a monolith. It is the board is made up of the nations of the world, and as we have sometimes heard, they don't all agree on things. And they rely on this function to ensure that there is a different perspective on that. The last thing, the fifth thing, is that we have joint guidelines, especially on the validations of self-assessments. So we agree on what we can agree on and not agree on. And it is a jointly owned. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention is that it's a well-established process, the structure is all there, but there are still ways in which independence can be partly compromised. That is not policy. because there are many other functions that affect us. For example, HR processes, and who gets hired and who does not within the department. They're all ADB employees, and there's a way to influence that. Second is the communications policy. We had to fight long and hard to make sure that it's inefficient for us, but we publish our own stuff. In fact, in the World Bank, they had their own website. We don't do that, but it's something we've thought about. Audit, you can be audited, okay? And we've always said, yes, we should be subject to audit, but not by the internal audit department of the institution, which reports to the president. Anyway, so that's just one thing, is that there are all these processes that are not in the policy, but can affect how you function.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Yes, you can have a policy, but there are elements within the policy that don't give you total clarity, part one. Secondly, critical in independence is both the communication and the HR independence. We have it at IFAD quite established, but it took a long time to get there. As Ashwani would know, he was there in the early stages when the policy was being developed. It's a battle and everyone has to go through it. And of course, having joint manuals assists and helps to regulate, but there are still issues and tensions around that. But having an infrastructure actually helps to protect. I think, as all the colleagues here would also know, having a non-renewable term is a key issue of independence. So there's no expectation of the future, and the theory is you'll say it as it is, because you're not likely to be employed. And that is quite clear in the ECG, the non-renewal element on that. So thanks for those insights. We now move over to Veronique. Could you please provide us with practical insights into how the relationship between independence, credibility, and utility of the evaluation function has fostered opportunities for inclusive evaluation as a catalyst for organizational learning and transformation? Over.
Thank you. Another very easy question, of course. So I'll try to respond, and maybe also following up on what Manny was saying about independence, because I think that at the heart of this question is, of course, before there is learning, it is important that there is something to learn. So it's very much about the quality of our evaluation, the objectivity, the credibility of it, and that also depends on the independence. So I would say that in these current times of uncertainty and tensions, and also with the new artificial intelligence and social media, and I'm a very big fan of what positivity could come out of it, but I'm conscious that a lot of false news and untrue evidences float around. I think the role of independent evaluation is even more important, and we can make sure that we are drivers of learning that's based on real evidence, and that's really something that I believe should be a part of our compass in the coming years. There are three factors that were mentioned that could lead to learning, and one is independence, the second one is engagement, maybe linked to what you asked earlier about empowerment, and the last one is how we do the knowledge sharing. And I will go very rapidly on the first two so that I spend a bit more time on knowledge sharing and the learning itself. On independence, it's important that, of course, all of our learning is based on the fact that we are providing credible findings, and so independence is the bedrock of our credibility. Of course, it is embedded in our policy, and Manny gave all of the key points of what is important in the policy. But it's also in the day-to-day work, and it's also about our intellectual independence and not just the material independence. And we have to ensure that the material that we produce, the findings, the recommendations, are considered as credible, tested, and that's not enough. It needs also to be forward-looking. All of that needs to be produced with a lot of empowerment of the different stakeholders, and I'm saying that's important because when you talk about learning, it's not only the quality of the lessons, it's also the environment and the disposition of those who receive the lessons and the recommendations or the findings. So I think we have to think of how we can create an environment for empowerment, engagement, inclusiveness, so listening, and all of the other elements that my colleagues mentioned earlier. And that would be, in a way, it could be considered as enough to have credible findings based on evidence and that are useful for our colleagues, but we know that that's only part of it. We can be useful and very of high quality and never be used. So in the last few years, all independent evaluation departments have made a lot of efforts, and in a way this evaluation week is one of these also highlight of all of these efforts to make sure that we share our findings, that we share the knowledge, that we collaborate, that the dissemination is in the right way to the right audience, in the right form. So knowledge sharing is really important. That's, to me, there is no accountability if there is no knowledge sharing. So to go back to the question that you answered originally, Manny, not only it's the same, it's two parts of the coin, but I really think they are self-reinforcing. You have accountability if there is knowledge that there is something to be accountable for. So it's really about using the learning aspect and the knowledge sharing as a way to amplify the accountability, but also to make sure that that the lessons are learned and that we all go in the same direction and that we improve the impact of our institutions. So in terms of knowledge sharing, it's, as I said, to amplify the utility of our evaluation. And we've all made a lot of efforts to be clearer in our messages, to have more user-friendly reports. We use infographics much more than 10 years ago. We also not only produce evaluation reports, but we produce digestible evaluation reports. They are shorter, they are very often also message-oriented, easier to understand, shorter in a number of pages. But that, again, is not enough. We produce thousands of pages of evaluation, and that's where I would like to finish, is the importance of embracing artificial intelligence when we disseminate and share our knowledge and information. We have already started in the Asian Development Bank, it's called EVA, at the EBRD, it's called Lessons Bots. It's using artificial intelligence to pull all of this wealth of information together so that it will be easily accessible using natural language. And Lessons Bot has been launched already in EBRD. My vision, and that's really something that I hope to do before I stop working for evaluation in a few months, is to make sure that this Lessons Bot becomes a tool that is accessible and by not just EBRD, but the other members of the ECG, and maybe hopefully by the larger community, so that we start using artificial intelligence for real mutual reliance and for real knowledge sharing in an easy way. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Veronique. Also very candid. A key issue, we cannot assume if you produce credible evaluation it's going to get used. It's of no use if it's not used, and therefore your focus on making it digestible, using AI, method-oriented is very key and critical. You've also mentioned the element of independence, as we all are independent officers here. There's three elements to it, as we normally say. There's structural, who we report to, behavioral, what we do and don't do. So if you don't get a second term, you're likely to be harder because you have no aspirations. And the third part, which can trick us, is operational independence, the power over HR, the power over communications. And that is elements that have to constantly be worked on. But having previously served in the UN evaluation group as head of evaluation of UNDP, I can tell you that the bar with the ECG is significantly higher as far as the policy goes and the independence goes. And that's because of the banks. The culture is very, very different. And I think that's something we can actually commend ourselves for the 11 officers or members that we have. With that, I now move over to Ashwani. If you could please provide us with a few examples of how your office has moved towards increasing the points of intersection, the touch points, between the evaluand and the evaluator through a journey that deepens dialogue and conversation. And we are not giving a value judgment to the dialogue. The dialogue can sometimes be very tense, but it is the journey which we want to hear about. Over, Ashwani.
Thank you very much, Indran. It's a really good question, like all the others, so congratulations to you and your team for putting those questions. I think implicit in your question is also the fact that an evaluation should not be seen only as a report, and that it is a journey, as you mentioned, it's a process, and intersection points are fundamental to foster learning throughout the process and not just at the end once you have the report, and for empowerment of those who are being evaluated, especially sometimes people who are affected by operations, and you include them in an evaluation process, you give them an opportunity to also articulate their own views, which they might not otherwise have. So having said that, some concrete examples of what we have done in the New Development Bank. I'm sure for my colleagues who are sitting on the table, this is something they do all the time, but I still want to nevertheless highlight some of these intersection points that we're building in. Thanks also to the recommendations made to us by the ECG to strengthen those intersection points in our evaluation processes. So the first thing we started doing, or one of the things we started doing, is for large evaluations, not for routine project-level evaluations, we organize systematically an inception workshop. Once you have the approach paper that my colleagues were mentioning earlier, you know, the design, the concept note, it's not enough just to send that across to the board and to the management, but to bring together all the stakeholders up front to have a dialogue, including authorities from the project entities and others. So it's not just management and the board, but also project authorities and others who might be concerned, co-financiers, etc. Because that really starts, that's the setting the stage right up front for having a process which is constructive, engaging, and where dialogue is really valued. The other thing we have done, thanks again to the ECG, and we do that again also for large evaluations, especially evaluations which might take longer than other evaluations, and that is to produce an interim report. An interim report which don't include recommendations, include our initial findings, emerging findings, but not all the findings as well, because the analysis is still unfolding. And this also links to my point in my earlier intervention about minimizing surprises. But it gives an opportunity for fostering dialogue, exchanges, listening, what I mentioned earlier as well. So having an interim report, especially for those corporate level evaluations which take a bit longer, and we also do it for country portfolio evaluations, which are also very comprehensive and take some time. The other thing we have done this year is the introduction of evaluation reference groups, where you bring in all the stakeholders and bring them together from time to time along the process to discuss with them, to share with them emerging findings. 2 points before I finish, because the card was already put up, that I've got a minute left. One should not underestimate the value of dialogue, engagement after the evaluation is completed. And it does not have to happen only once in the form of a seminar. The findings and recommendations and lessons in a particular evaluation remain relevant for quite some period of time. And therefore, to have that process also after the evaluation, that's when really you can really see how you can make those changes and strengthen ownership in the evaluation process. And as we have done here, like many others also, we actually have a colleague, a very senior colleague, a chief from the NDB, from the operational department, who's here with us. So bring them in as well. It's not just the evaluators doing the sharing and the dialogue. To close, in all these intersections that Indran was speaking about, I personally, and I'm sure the others do the same, pay a lot of value to engaging with authorities at the country level. It's not just management and board. Really to listen to country stakeholders and to partners at the country level throughout the evaluation process. So we try to bring them in as much as possible at different stages of the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwani. Some takeaways, the P2P, from paper to people. We are not auditors, and there has been a tendency I've witnessed in my own career over 30 years. It used to be transactional. We send an email to them, they freak out, they get back with a long story, we say we're not going to do it, it goes back and forth, and by the time you finish, both sides are quite exhausted. We need to move away from that. We're dealing with people on the other end who also have a lot of experience and also pride in their work. So we need to watch the words we use. There's many ways to say things, but let's say so in a way that is also constructive and moves ahead. And everything doesn't have to be in the report. Some parts which are harder can actually be in the dialogue. That's the first point. The second point is no surprises, having the emerging workshops. That's almost to test the waters, put the findings, watch the body language and the reaction, and adjust as you move along. And a third part I think we tend not to do is the dialogue after, because we're so busy. We stop it now, we're moving on to the next evaluation. So thanks for those insights and also concrete parts. All the colleagues have mentioned the word journey. It's one of my favorite concepts. I use it in NEC and elsewhere. And sitting here today, I was here a decade ago when the first of the AEW was launched. And how did that time go so quickly? So the question we need to ask ourselves is, as the clock is ticking, we learn as we move, and it's very iterative. If I think about the evaluation conversations that took place in the late 90s and in the 2000s, it was pure accountability. And one of your indicators of being a good evaluator was how much damage and blood there was on the other side. So, and that meant you were independent and you were credible. And I like the point also mentioned about, which Manny's mentioned, independent of management and the board. The board is not homogeneous. And I've even made recommendations to the board, and I've had tensions and pushback from the board. So holding that line is really important. With that, we move over to a final set of comments from Jose. If you could provide us with a few insights on how your office worked to shift what are often negative perceptions of independent evaluation from oversight to a shared goal. This word that's coming through is sharing, collaboration, etc. But of course, not losing the principal issue of we make the final call. Jose.
Great question, great question. For a while you were reading the question, I was thinking that this target of the shift from the traditional way of being seen, the evaluation have been seen in Latin America, and let's talk Latin America and Caribbean, is that the evaluation was seen as auditing with a different name. So some distrust, some isolation, the evaluation as a magic box in which nobody knows what was going on. So for us in CABEI to move forward and do the shift, to achieve the shifting, we could share 3 important lessons. The first lesson is to change the communication strategy. So no more magic box in which nobody knew what was going on, to a communication strategy in which the dialogue has been since the beginning, since we were thinking about to do an evaluation, the approach paper or concept note, the data collection, and also the early findings, and then the discussion of the recommendations, also the contextualization of the recommendations. That's something, for example, very important for us. How those recommendations respond to current context, to the sequential process in the institutions. You cannot move from A to theta in one step. I mean, you have to be aware of what is the context in which you are creating the recommendation. So it's not just a matter of the data, the method, the application of a very rigorous theory of change and all the statistics or quantitative or qualitative methods, but also to identify where the institution is or where the project is and from which point is going to move the recommendation, the project or the institution from the point A to B B to C. So the sequential processes something very important. So the first lesson we can share is that to change the communication strategy of the evaluation. How do we build it? How do we implement it? How do we finish it? The second one is to promote the co-construction. I mean, this idea that we are creating value, I mean, the value, you mentioned from P to P. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody in the MDB will agree that we want to improve the welfare of the people, that we want to reduce poverty, that we want to create welfare and economic growth, positive environmental impacts. So everybody will agree that all of us are working in a business model, looking for the same results. It's just that we are working in different sides of the institution. So the co-construction is something we have been introducing since the beginning and all the steps during the evaluation. The third lesson I want to share is that we have product of that dialogue to create the empowerment to see the evaluation as a tool, the utility of the evaluation, the utility for the project manager, for the implementation unit, or the utility for the decision taker at the board level, is something we have been strengthening all the time during this process of co-creation of value. Let me finish with this. We think that while the corporate governance structures guarantee that we have the check and balances, check and maker separated, independent evaluation, self-evaluation, business units, I think we have to make the systems to make us stuck. I mean, the systems, functioning systems, have to be able to create this added value chain in which evaluation is seen as investment. I mean, the MDBs and the institutions in general should see that the added value of the evaluation is to create higher impact, higher welfare of the people. So at the end of the day, this investment is profitable. I mean, at the end of the day, it's part of the business model, and that's why the co-creation. In short, what we are promoting here is a cultural shift from evaluation as a control to evaluation as a critical accompaniment. From oversight to a shared responsibility for institutional improvement from all of us, all the participants. And while a gradual process of this is applied in an institution, you increasingly see the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose. I like your point about evaluation is another word for audit. There are some conversations happening with restructuring, or why don't you all just work together? It's the same thing. No, it's not. The answer is no. There's quite fundamental differences between audit and evaluation. We are not in the compliance. We go deeper and we ask deep questions about the so what and what does it mean, and it's much more critical. We also use language that, if needed, it's our power to say when there are problems, and we enter the terrain that can be political. And you don't find that much in audits. You look at the international experience, during various crises at a country and international level, those organizations and governments and departments had good audits, but they failed. So, we need to ask deeply what happened. The operation was a success, but the patient died. So having the tick box doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work or not. And I think we need to hold our ground on that. Books have been written on audit and evaluation and the changes and challenges between them. We need to engage in the subject, but we are a very different beast in that regard. And I think your point about critical friend, mother's love, is what we do. But that also means we need to get out of our comfort zone and begin to understand neuroscience, the brain on the other end, and engage. And not just engage because you got the power. We have the power, we know that. But that does not mean we must not have the humility to engage with colleagues in order to build up a shared understanding. The concept that keeps coming up is shared. So on that, before opening to the audience, and we have about 12 minutes for questions, if you could join me in giving a round of applause to these deep insights. And I will share a resource at the end, which is a slide deck for your takeaway, one of which is called Evaluation Pills. So we have 90-second clips, which actually go to the heart of what's been spoken about today in a very interactive AI form. What are the big questions, as they would say, the elephant in the room. With that, colleagues, could we have the mics up? And let's take 3 questions from 3 parts of the thing. And if you could also introduce yourself, organization, and be specific. Okay.
Thank you. Javier Guarnizo, UNIDO, Evaluation Office. Thank you for the panel, and would like to be very provocative, taking on your points. I have always a dream, and I started 2015 with the SDGs 2030 agenda, national reviews, national evaluation offices, building capacities in the member states. My dream at that moment was evaluation offices, and I was telling my colleagues that we should work to disappear as an office. We should work to create the capacity and the changes in organizations and countries that they are able to do self-evaluations, truthful reporting, results orientations, rules-based, innovation and learning themselves. If we are able to do that, we should be closing evaluation offices 2030 in a very nice ceremony. That was my dream, and I think it's still my dream. I talk my colleagues like that. Now, Manny, you told your office quality assurance of self-evaluations have 80% of ratings agreed. The independent evaluations also are about 80%, let's say, accurate. We don't have a 100% rate of perfect independent evaluation. So in your case, how would you justify to keep your office now? Because it seems that the bank has already the internal capacity doing exactly what the independent evaluation is doing. And then what is the value? I have answers for that, but I would like to hear your answers and the panel members' answer as well. Because at the end of the day, it's all about a trade-off, and resources are there. And if we are able to create these RRR results, rules, and renovation, which is learning, on the operation side, why should we exist anymore? Thank you.
I'll take another question before moving to the provocative question. Why should we exist? And thank you for that. Expected.
Hello, Tanya Rajadel. I'm an evaluation expert at the EIB Group evaluation function. Thank you so much. This is a really very insightful discussion. I have 2 very quick questions. The first one is you were mentioning how we're trying to be more topical, more timely in the types of evaluations we conduct. And in doing so, we're trying to get a sense of what is of interest to the board, to senior management at any point in time. And I think we're absolutely right in doing this, but sometimes I wonder whether this might not be creating blind spots. Isn't our role also to bring to the attention of the board and senior management some topics that they might not be on their radar screen at the moment? So that's my first question. And the second one is, I was wondering whether you have whether you have in the past, or whether you have any plans to undertake any assessment of the actual use of our evaluations. And in particular, I often wonder, whether our recommendations or the lessons learned from our evaluations are actually leading to systemic change in our institutions. And at the EIB group, so with Emmanuel, our head of evaluation, we're launching just now such an assessment of a follow-up of recommendations to try to get a sense of whether we're actually having an impact on the organization. So we'll keep you posted next year when we get the findings from this assessment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The question over here and then in the back, and these 4 questions, so far the 2 sets are quite generic, so I'm going to give an opportunity to all the panelists to respond to them. One, do we need independent evaluation if you have self-evaluation that's working? Secondly, how do we bring attention to the board on blind spots? And the third part, which is how do we measure who evaluates the evaluators? How do we measure whether we're having an impact and bringing about organizational change so far? Madame.
Yeah, Thanks for the session. It's very insightful and educational. I'm Kate from Cargill Sustainability, and my questions is also follow up on the knowledge management and learning sharing. I'm wondering, because we have a wonderful panelist here as a great representative from various MDBs, I wanted to understand whether currently that you have business processes in place that to ensure that recommendations from evaluation report is integrated into the project proposal approval process, whether that you have approval assessment framework that is already integrate all the recommendations. If not, what is the main reason? Thank you.
Thank you. Very specific question. A new project is a precursor and evaluation. Are the recommendations integrated? So what is the process in your organizations? All of us have that. Asela.
Yeah. Asela Kalugampitia, UNFPA Independent Evaluation Office, National Evaluation Capacity Development Specialist. Thank you very much for the panelists, all, rich inputs. I just want to, ask something related to what Shwani mentioned. One is that Shwani mentioned this is not fault findings. This is what you are mentioning many times, right? At the same time, now, if you are familiar with Evaluation Globe books in different regions, the main finding is that the weakest domain is civil society, social system. Citizens are not aware of evaluation, they don't demand evaluation, and they don't ask for evaluation, things like that. So this may be one area that we need to strengthen. So political system, there are 3 domains in this, political system and professional, but weakest one is the social system. So I think maybe one area we need to strengthen is that one. Second thing, as Ashwani mentioned, was about, there are many things you mentioned. Another one is about communication. Strong communication is needed. Actually, it says evaluators are the weakest communicators, right? And in this sophisticated world, we need definitely more, enhanced communication tagged to evaluation, I think. So in this case, I wonder whether evaluators and evaluators' role should be modified, or the TOR should be modified accordingly to make evaluation results, or they communicate evaluation results more efficiently and effectively. That's what I'm wondering. At the same time, also the role of evaluation commissioners. What is the role of evaluation commissioners to make evaluation results more accessible, more public, as well as more usable? I think this role of evaluation commissioners and evaluators, whether we should rethink about their role in this case, because it's very important, because who wants to read 200 pages evaluation report, or whether with this and technologies we rethink about communicating evaluation results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pause on questions and pose to the panel in 2 minutes to address any of these 4 questions. The first one, do we still need independent evaluation if self-evaluation is working? That's being provocative, looking at the continuum, but it is a question, it is a real issue, because the tensions often in the organizations are the discrepancy in scores between the independent evaluation, which tends to be, let's put it this way, more conservative, and the self-evaluation, which tends to be often optimistic and euphoric, but not met with results. The second one is, what about the blind spots? Yes, we are driven by the board, but there are other parts that we have the prerogative to put on the table, and I think the policy allows for that, because we're only working on relevance, and if you know in your evaluations, relevance always gets the highest score, because how can it not be relevant? But we need to come up with the other angle. The third part is acting on recommendations for the future. What are the triggers for new programs? When a new program comes on cycle, is it mandatory, required, prescribed that it is informed by a completed evaluation, whether it's a country level or the other level? And I'm sure the colleagues will be able to answer that. Broadly, the question on evaluators are not necessarily good communicators. There's a lot of research on the Myers-Briggs profile of what they are. and they tend to be an INTJ. If you Google it, you'll find a personality that you may or may not like. But they don't see the necessity to work on empathy because they believe facts matter. It's science. So it's an area we need to grapple because the evaluand is generally not who we are, personality-wise. And of course, the last question is, how do we test our own relevance? Who evaluates the evaluators, to put it bluntly? I know there's evaluation policies that happen, the policy review, but how do we actually show a value proposition, and what are the indicators for that, whether it's budget or board approval or those elements? Independence is a key word globally right now in multiple levels, and I think you know what I'm talking about. So with that, let me start this time with Jose, moving towards me, and we'll have the host then make final comments. Jose, over to you.
Thank you, Indran. Let me focus on the colleague of Cargill, the specific one about how during the process of the proposal, the business cycle or project cycle, how the evaluation is incorporated until validation and the closing of the project. In most of the multilateral development banks, it is included since the beginning. The proposal includes baselines, for example, result frameworks, in order to demonstrate what is the result, the expected result of the theory of change, and the results change depend on the approach they use, in which later on, once the project go to the board of directors for approval, so you know what is the target of the project, not just from the point of view of the business, but also the development targets, which is going to be achieved by the project during after the implementation. And later on, there is the monitoring process with self-evaluation and independent evaluation. Used to be the project monitoring report or similar tools in which the results are being cut to see the progress. Let's say progress indicators most of the time. Later on, there is a completion when it's finished, but it's part of the project cycle in which there is validation from the independent evaluation office, and some have ex post impact evaluations in sampling or something like that of some projects, but it's incorporated in the project cycle. I guess you are asking because in Cargill maybe private sector is thinking to incorporate that, or how are you going to incorporate that?
And so those kind of recommendations can very well to be integrated into the new project proposal in the new project design. And that's the reason why I asked this question, because of simply sharing knowledge in text form or infographic, that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is actually to integrate into our business processes, actually integrate it into the new product design. So that's the reason why I asked this question.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I got it now. Well, in the case of multilateral development banks, you could say it's pretty similar. I mean, we have, for example, traditional projects, but there are also financing through the financial system, so that's another product, or policy-based loans. So you could find something familiar there to make the analysis you need to do for the case of Cargill, for example. And about just let me finish this. I think it's very important we point out the communication of the results and also the use of the recommendations or the adoption of the recommendations, and see how that is shaping the change in the institution. I think that second part of the added value of the evaluation is very important to focus, because it's not just the production of knowledge, learning, accountability, but also later on what is the level of impact, let's say, of the recommendations to shape the institutional agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Indran. A few remarks, conscious of time. On the issue of whether by 2030 we don't need independent evaluation anymore because the self-evaluation systems are so robust. It's a wishful thinking, and even under those circumstances, I think we still need independent evaluation for a number of reasons. First of all, independent evaluators perhaps can identify lessons that those who are actually involved in the operations or the policies may not see, because the independent evaluators come from a fresh perspective. They look at evidence ex novo and are not really involved in the day-to-day implementation of those projects and policies. That's one. Secondly, we see that even if there is a good self-evaluation report, and we are validating that, we do find that, and it's human nature, as Indran was saying earlier on, at times they tend to be over-generous with their interpretation of success. So that is another thing. So I think the independent evaluation is still required. Moving on, and I'm sure my colleagues can comment on that as well. On choosing topics for evaluation, and should it be only a top-down approach that the board tells you, and so on. At least from our experience, and I'm sure my colleagues do the same, we actually make a lot of proposals ourselves to the board in our work plan. And the way we identify those topics is because we have a good hold of the portfolio. We do a portfolio analysis, see which projects merit to be studied in more detail, because we can choose, and when we make those proposals, we can choose what might be priorities for the institution. To give you a concrete example, next year my team recommended to the Director General of the Indian Regional Office, I think we should look at private sector engagement in India, because the amount of non-sovereign operations in India are very, very low, and perhaps it can be a formative evaluation to help you identify the bottlenecks to address private sector lending in India. Finally, I'll stop then on who evaluates the evaluators. I see this at least at two levels. One is evaluating the evaluation function as a whole, and that happens periodically in our organizations through external reviews, etc., etc. But what we do quite systematically, particularly for strategic evaluations, not so much for project level evaluations, we mobilize senior external independent advisors in the evaluation process. And these individuals will write a short quality assurance report at the end of the evaluation on the quality of the process and the quality of the methodology and the evaluation. It's a 2-page or 3-page report which we annex to the report, and we share that with the board and others. So we are holding ourselves accountable to that extent. Thank you very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you. I fully agree with what was said before. For the first question, I think it's nice to have this type of provocative questions once in a while. The thing is that I also believe that self-evaluation and independent evaluation shouldn't be perceived as being contradictory, or if one is really doing well, then the other one is not needed. But on the contrary, they are very complementary. And more and more now, when we have external review of our work, so that's when the evaluators are being evaluated by an external review, it's not just independent evaluation that they look at the whole architecture of evaluation, of the evaluation function in an organization for good governance, and it includes both self-evaluation and independent evaluation. In a way, I would say that for the reason that Shweni was highlighting, if there was a really high quality self-evaluation system, which is unfortunately not the case in our institution, EBRD, the first thing, if we were to say, okay, we don't need independent evaluation anymore, I think the first thing that would be recommended 1 or 2 years later would be to say, what about having an independent evaluation so that we don't rely on self-evaluation itself? So that, I think it really goes together. But definitely we would like to have very high quality self-evaluation. On your question, Tanya, about I think it was more about the timeliness and the topics that we are picking. So maybe I was not clear enough. When I say timeliness, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a demand that has been expressed for it. For example, we never get a demand from board members or actually from anyone about what we should put on our work program. So it's more about us being aware of what's there, which includes, to me, it includes making sure that there is no blind spot. So if there is a blind spot that we identify, or if there is a topic, like a few years ago, MRL, bail-in products, nobody wanted the evaluation, neither the board nor management, which after, first year we say, okay, maybe we can postpone. Second year we say, well, that's because they don't want it, we're going to do it. And because we thought that it was timely, but in the sense that it was needed by the institution. So timeliness is not just to respond to a demand, it's because we believe that it has an added value to the institution. On the use of recommendation, I'm not sure I got your question, but just to clarify that when there is a recommendation, management has to agree, disagree, or partly agree. If they do agree on a recommendation or partly agree on a recommendation, they have to develop a management action plan. That's where we can provide feedback about what the recommendation spirit was and whether if the management decides that one action will be to include in the design of the next one, whether we believe that that's the right response or not. So that's how we make sure that our recommendations are acted upon. And so yes, there is also very much of a need of what you were saying, Tanya, about looking at whether the recommendations themselves, the so what of these recommendations. We are also having in our next annual evaluation review a special chapter that will be looking at that. And we do that in parallel, in a way, with the EIB, so that we share our approach methodologies regularly, so that even though we don't do it gently, we will have findings that we can compare. And I think on communication, it was already answered. I very much believe that we don't do our job if we don't communicate about what we found, and that it doesn't mean that we need to do it to the whole world. It might be a good communication, even just internally sometimes, but it is very important that we include a communication strategy that is adapted to the topic and to the environment, so that we are sure that our work has been meaningful and that we're not spending money doing work that is not going to have any impact. And I'll leave Manny to complement.
That was terrific. Sorry. Okay. So just three things. Javier, you elicited. Hello?
Yep.
Okay. Terrific, provocative question. Let me just remind you that we're all subject to one thing we do in terms of self-assessment every year. I assume all of you do this. You pay your taxes, your income taxes, and it's a self-assessment. Okay. Now, it works pretty well, we think. Do we agree that we no longer need the Internal Revenue Service? I don't think so. Because I think that the tendency to not report properly might always be there. It's just human nature. So I believe that we will always be needed, as long as the outcomes we propose are not as obvious as those in commercial banks. And I think so. The second thing is, I think, Tanya, your point on whether our evaluation recommendations are actually having an effect. I think that has two levels. One is, do they actually lead to an action plan that is implementable? And I believe that's a role for management to report onto the board. The action plan is theirs, and they should report on that. On whether or not those action plans actually lead to impact is something that I think that we can do better at. I don't think we're doing enough of that. And I think that we should be holding our own function to account to make sure that we are making that difference. Not saying it's going to be easy, So I'm very much looking forward to your report so we can copy it in the future. The third thing on communications, and I know my colleagues here know I've been on a rampage about this, that to make our reports not only digestible, but appetizing. In the end, Tanya, we can lead the horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But we can at least make sure that the water looks pretty nice. That has been an enormous challenge. And I'm not just blaming our own team. It's really difficult, the art of communicating a hard message and making sure that it's well evidenced and succinct. And it'll be a long-standing battle, but I think that we're all committed to that in the future. Thanks.
Much, Manny. Before final comments, I'm just going to ask Secretariat to put on the slide deck. So what I will share from the perspective of IFAD, you'll all get a copy of this, is something that we've been doing also within the ambit of the ECG. We'll just go through the main page. Communicating effectively through neuroscience. Next. Next. So there's a problem, there's the science, there's the action and the results, and that's been the conversation today. Next. So what we did, the first part, the problem is we assume that through evidence we affect change and enhance quality. That's the big assumption. But it's really been shown that 70% of change initiatives actually fail. And we need to move away from evaluants, who are, evaluators see us as the secret police, versus the evaluators. A neuroscience-based approach is just about being nice to the evaluand. It's more sophisticated than that. It's not as bimodal. Next. So we need to move from evaluation phobia to evaluation embracing. Not working, because if results do not translate into the change that we want to see, then we need to shift production, generation, and assimilation modalities, which is what the panel has spoken about. Next. So, in essence, the science says we need to create space for compassion in your delivery of evaluation findings, the journey all have spoken about, to ensure that people look forward to an evaluation, maybe, maybe not. Create psychological safe spaces for freedom of expression, and that takes a time to build up, and to ensure that the evaluation approach is stress-free. Science has proven that any word linking to judgment resonates with childhood on getting a report card. So if you look at the faces of evaluants, even adults, their heart rate is probably higher when you are there. Their pressure rate goes up. And how do you do that? Because it's happening at a subconscious level, because we like to judge, but we don't like being judged. That's the reality of it. Next. So better engagement and better data is equal to better evaluation. Look at all these elements. Follow. And what we've done is we've embedded in the evaluation manual at IFAD a online training that helps you to go along on how to communicate more effectively. Everyone's spoken about communication. And it's not just about being nice, I'm here to help you. No, the brain on the other end is not listening to you. We need to be more sophisticated than that. We came up with what's called evaluation pills. You may want to watch these 60-second snippets where I have a conversation with Dr. Srini Pillai, International Neuroscience, on how to get evaluators to also be a little bit of psychologists and social workers and empathetic and mother's love. And we also have individual coaching sessions in our office that has helped a lot. So we moved from a pretty negative environment when I took over to one that is much more conducive and much more creative, I would say so. And that has been shown in various board statements. Next. So the results of a survey showed that internal change was positive. 87% of staff found it more positive. And 80% also thought it was good. You'll always get 20% who will disagree. So accept that. Right now, you can get any room, take a survey, and if it's daytime, ask them if it's day. 20% will say, no, it's night. You can test it wherever you want. It's human nature, so don't freak out. If you get 100%, you're an autocracy. Be careful. And generating opportunities for learning across divisions is important, and of course, dialogue. Next. And with that, my final comments relate to, so that today, on the 2nd of September in 2025, in this ancient city of Xi'an, the land of the terracotta, we have had evaluation leaders from the ECG who have surfaced every evaluation question possible. Think about it, and you're going to get a very detailed report which will be hyperlinked to this and others. And really what we try to demonstrate today is we don't need fancy PowerPoints, we need experience. And the knowledge and the experience are within people, not just us, but those we talk to. So if we start creating that we are here to learn and engage in a much more engaging manner, getting into neuroscience, we don't want to use a big word for it, women know this earlier, intuition, right? Knowledge, being able to read the room, read the environment, then say that, well, I've done a good evaluation. Why? Because the management didn't like it and they disagreed. Therefore, it must be good. That's ridiculous. It comes from like 25 years ago. So we are not in the kumbaya group, but by the same token, we need to engage in a way that's much more professional, where they look forward to the evaluation, not based on the fact it's independent, but based on the gravity of the messages and how it is presented, as you spoke about how digestible, how enticing it is. And talking about good food, we had fantastic dinner, and we'll have more. So we got to actually create the appetite for the work we have, and that means we need to also create the credibility. So with that, please join me in thanking my colleagues. This is an Evaluation Cooperation Group event. These are heads Manny, Veronique, Ashwani, and Jose. And thank you for your attention.